Welcome to Embodied Learning Systems. This is a video channel with high quality somatic education information and dialogue. And today I'm here with soprano Hailey McAvoy. She has recently appeared as Mem, the leading role in the world premiere of Paola Prestini's Sensorium X at the Common Senses Festival in Omaha. She can tell you more about what that is. We met in the context of her Alexander Technique training program, which is the same space where I teach. So we met kind of by accident, but we've established a dialogue that I really want to share with you. Hailey has also sung with the Metropolitan Opera's Opera Evolved series, in Lincoln Center's Appel Room at the Aspen Music Festival, the Hogfish Regenerative Arts, Cedar Rapids Opera Ithaca, and the Baton Rouge Symphony. So she's been getting around as a singer. She's also a speaker, advocate for disability inclusion. She's a teacher and a person training to be a teacher of the Alexander Technique. So thank you for coming, Hailey, and welcome to be our first student training to be a somatic educator on the channel.
Thank you so much. Thank
Welcome.
you. It's my huge pleasure to be here. I'm really, thank you for having me.
Yeah, you wouldn't believe the effort that we had to do to get our tech together this morning. So this is all great. And before I go on and on about you, maybe just, for all of us on the channel to just get in the present moment a little bit, just share how you're doing today and, how we met and what interested you about being here today.
I would say I'm doing well today. I'm at my home in Kingston, New York, and it's a nice day. It's a little overcast, but very beautiful. And in terms of how we met and how I feel about being here, Claire, we met in the lobby of Balance Arts, where I've been able to strike up a number of sort of like happenstance conversations because there are just many, many interesting people passing through. And some of the other trainees in the Balance Arts training program are great admirers of your work. And so I vicariously had also become a great admirer of your work. And one day I think you sat down to put your shoes on, like near the couch where I was sitting, and I just said hello and we got to talking, and talking about, my process of training in Alexander Technique to teach, and also about how my process has felt. Of course, everyone's process is unique to them, but how my process has felt particularly unique to me because I have cerebral palsy, which mostly affects my legs. Although through Alexander Technique, I've learned everything affects everything, right? So it's really like a whole system, setting deal that I'm working with in my Alexander Technique teacher training. And yeah, we just got to discussing that a little bit and what that's like. And I'm really grateful to share more about that with you today.
I'm feeling really delighted to be here because this conversation and the layers that have developed since we met is really important to me. And I'm so into it. And then I'm just going to let it all go and pack up my stuff, turn off my phone, and go to the forest after this today.
That sounds wonderful.
Yeah. So if you enjoy the conversation, there'll be some links for listening to Hailey sing. There'll be some links for her website. I'll have a link to one of the operas that she was in because there was a little PBS feature about it. It's really interesting. And other stuff that we're going to talk about. So welcome, Hailey. Yeah, so the first thing when we first met, as I said, when we were preparing for this, I was just fascinated because I had, I love to meet all the trainees, and I said, oh, so Hailey, where are you in your training? And you were just so overjoyed to say how slow it was going. And you seemed so happy about that. And so tell me a little bit about that and just how you started to, how you encountered the technique and why that slowness is so delightful compared to other things you've been through in your life.
For sure. So I will say, so I first encountered Alexander technique actually through a singing program, um, which I guess is not uncommon. But in my story, it's interesting that I should have come to it that way because, I was a kid who grew up with cerebral palsy, which I, of course, still have. Um, but, with that being part of my growing up, I experienced, all manner of, different kinds of treatments that would hopefully help or fix my cerebral palsy, right? And I went through all of these until I was 18. And basically at that point, I was like, I personally do not see that these treatments are more beneficial than the harm they are causing me. So I decided because they hurt, right? Lots of them are painful. And so I was like, I'm done. I'm going to be done. I'm going to college. I'm going to study music. I just have to do this on my own way. I have to figure out what works for me, and I can't be in this cerebral palsy treatment hamster wheel anymore, right?
Yeah,
And I
you were
had
done.
really closed the door. Yeah, I had really closed the door. And then through singing, one summer I was at like a festival of song in Los Angeles, California. And as part of the curriculum out there, they had Alexander Technique group classes. Um, and yeah, when I found out that it was like a body work style thing that was done in a group, I immediately like walked in on the defensive,
Mhm.
because most of the experiences I had had in those kind of settings were with people who were professionals, but who didn't know how to apply what they were doing to someone with a disability. And so I was very used to being told, like, oh, just do what works for you. And if it doesn't work, like, just go stand against the wall or something like that. You know what I mean? Like, without advice for how to make something work for me. So I was basically ready to go to this Alexander Technique class and hate it. Uh, yeah. And I got there and I was walking around the room, and the teacher did pull me aside and she asked me if I had hurt myself because I was limping. And she just wanted to make sure that I wasn't going to get further injured in the class. And I
Mm,
said, oh, no, no, I'm not hurt. I have cerebral palsy. Um,
mm.
and I said, do you want me to try to walk straighter? And she was like, oh, what does that look like?
Wow, why did you ask her that question? Because you could?
um,
Is it because you could and you thought she might want that?
Well, I asked her that question because I knew that it was like the abnormality of my gait that had called her attention to me.
Yeah.
Um, and in my life growing up, like basically my gait had been the most scrutinized in gait studies that were used to determine my CP treatment.
Whoa.
Um, yeah, and as a kid, I felt that those were like extremely high stakes situations, and I really wanted to minimize the invasive quality of the treatment applied to me. So for those
Ooh.
particular moments, I would try to put on like an able-bodied walk, you know?
Whoa.
Yeah, and
So
like
that was
I
like an
think
expression of agency for you, though, because you were like trying to head it off at the pass in a way.
I was.
Yeah.
And basically, like, I just snapped straight into that. It was like she was
Whoa.
commenting on my gait, and I was like, okay, cool. Do you want me to make it better
Mm,
by able-bodied standards? Right.
mm, mm-hmm,
And she said, what does that look like? And so I did it.
mm.
And she paused and said, how does that feel to you? And no one had ever asked me that. And I said, oh, well, it feels much worse. And she said, then that's not what I'm after at all. And that was like, I still get a little like teary eyed talking about it because that was like a huge moment for me
Yeah.
that, and I just realized in like, and then what basically when she put her hands on me in the Alexander technique, hands on kind of fashion, I
Yeah.
basically had this like intuitive thunderclap that just like screamed out, this is going to help your cerebral palsy in a way that nothing else ever has.
Yeah.
So basically that day I decided to like orient my life toward being able to have lessons in Alexander technique.
Wow. You can't see me, and I don't cry easily, but there's that feeling around my eyes, you know? And I mean, part of that story, if anybody listening has studied the Alexander technique, you know we have this loop that's a basic part of the process. It's like a psychophysical process that you kind of use to explore stuff. And you described it so beautifully. Well, when you think that, or when you do that, how does it feel? You get the feedback. Either you feel easier or you feel shittier. And then you go, okay, well, if you feel crappier, don't think that. Or try not doing something. And that's still such a radical proposition, not only just emotionally, mentally, but also for our nervous system as an expression of agency to go, well, I could do that. That was something that you had chosen to do for very good specific reasons at some point. But if you had chosen to do it, you could also choose not to do it.
Mm-hmm.
And this person was inviting you to express agency of some kind. And this is the healing part that has emerged in our conversation. So I just kind of wanted to thank you for the story, because I think it makes it clear. When we say agency, it can just be, becomes a meaningless word.
Yeah, I totally agree. And I think that's like, I think it was the combination of the fact that I could make the decision for myself in that moment of what I wanted to do, but also that she cared not just how it looked, but how it felt,
Yeah.
and that was a big, I hadn't had very much of that in my life. Most of the people who were assessing me were doing so based on appearance. And if I looked more able-bodied, that was what would earn the stamp of approval. And it always felt to me that my own somatic experience of like whether I was in pain or not, basically,
Right.
was not it took second place to how I looked to the outside eye.
Yeah.
And for her to say, like, no, 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 your feeling actually matters a lot, not only was that like a huge gift, that was also for me the opening of a door, right? Because it's like I had been working so hard to control how I looked. And I had been doing that through compensations in my movement, right? I mean, in
Mm-hmm.
Alexander technique, we talk about doing less. I had been
Mm-hmm.
trying to control how I looked by doing more all the time.
Mm-hmm.
Um, and once I was invited, actually, like, hey, you know what? You can do less. That was the beginning of a journey that has been leading to me not only looking, more smooth when I walk, which I now undoubtedly do after two
Yeah.
years of training. It is undeniable that my
Yeah.
limp has greatly decreased.
Yeah.
Um, but I feel better. I mean, I feel way better. And it's the fact that it's like the feeling is what can lead, and then the visual, component is the side effect, not
Yeah.
the thing that we're chasing.
And yeah, and the visual um is only a part of a whole person's experience. You know, what you look like to other people isn't just imbued by shape, but it's imbued by how you are feeling and being in yourself, right? And the pleasure and joy that you have in your own just being there or walking or, you know, yeah. So, wow. Okay. So let's see where to go. Well, so there were some other effects that we talked about that weren't just, so I want to hear about the singing,
Oh
right?
yeah.
And I want to backtrack because there's probably a lot of people here who don't know what cerebral palsy treatment is like, what
Hmm.
those medical interventions are like. But let's talk about other physical effects that the work had on you, and how it affected your singing, your mental health, and even because we talked about you being in Catholic school. And so I
Yeah.
was thinking, oh, she might have had a pretty, you know, big spiritual life one way or the other. And that's
Hmm.
could have been affected too. And, I know Alexander technique isn't the only thing, but it did have a big effect. So you want to tell a little bit more of that story, anything you feel like bringing in today.
Yeah, absolutely. Um, So I guess the first thing I'll say is that, after that thunderclap moment of like, whoa, this is really going to help me, I basically decided that day to try and go to a grad school where I could take Alexander lessons regularly. So I did. I did do that.
Yeah.
And I took lessons for 3 years, 2 years in school, and then 1 year I just continued with my teacher outside. Um, and yeah, I mean, even in those lessons, before I started teacher training, I mean, like those lessons were so beneficial to me, even when it was just 1 hour a week or 1 hour every other week. And I think the first thing that I noticed was, as you mentioned, I grew up going to Catholic school. Um, and actually Catholic school had a really like positive impression on me. I am a very, very spiritual person, and I think that side of my being just hadn't really been tapped before I got into that environment. And then all of a sudden it was like this huge flood of like spiritual um identification and it's a big part of me, a big part of my essence that finally had like a vent. So in some ways that was great, but I also coincidentally on my very first day of Catholic all-girls school that was to then last 7 years, on the very first day, I realized with no doubt about it that I was gay. And so that
Look at, the all
was
girl schools, just like,
I know, you walk in the door and they're like, "Oh, that's the one thing that's off limits? Well, just have a big old helping stacked away in your heart." It's like, "Okay, awesome, love that." Um,
uh,
but basically, like the combination of those things, right? It just led me to be so anxious. I became very, very anxious and really disembodied, I would say. Like I developed a really strong fear of touch because I was just really afraid that something in my physical quality would basically out me and I would get ostracized. So I just kind of like, the spiritual side of me was there anyway, right? So I decided to just take refuge in that and just be like, my spiritual life exists from right under my chin until the sky. Like, forgot about everything under my chin, right? That was like my goal. Maybe there's some
yeah.
heart in there, but like mostly I really disconnected from my body. And
And
by
your
the time
feet, and your feet, right?
my feet,
Like
I mean, my legs
yeah.
already, it was like the disconnect from cerebral palsy and then putting the disembodied nature from the religious environment that I was in on top, it was like double disconnect.
Yeah. Yeah.
Um, yeah, and it was really something about Alexander technique, the quality of touch that the teachers employed. There was something about it that I was able to welcome that touch into my system um,
Mm-hmm.
in a way that I couldn't welcome much other physical contact at that point. Um,
Mm,
and it really like, but the lessons I had in grad school just helped with my
mm.
anxiety so much. I mean, so much of it resolved with Alexander lessons. And then after deciding to teach, I mean, I was saying, even with the lessons, really, I'm thinking about the time ratio there. The
Yeah.
lessons, that was 1 hour once a week. Now in
Yeah.
training, I'm basically in class like 15 hours a week, 14 hours a week,
Yeah.
like a
Yeah.
lot more hours of Alexander. Um, but since starting training, I mean, of course, my legs and feet have been massively impacted. I mean, like the range of motion of my ankles has become super different. The availability of my hips for movement has become super different. My
Mm-hmm.
feet are starting to be able to open up onto the ground. I mean, I used to compare my feet to like little tiny hedgehogs that lived in my
Mm-hmm.
shoes, and they would go like,
Mm-hmm.
and like have the spikes only. And
Ooh.
yeah.
Yeah.
Yeah, and like gradually, they're learning how to
Oh,
uncurl. They're learning how to get support from the ground and like let
oh,
energy back out. Um, and as
yeah.
that's been happening, I've noticed two amazing things. One is that I used to get very bad seasonal depression that is basically gone now. My
Ooh,
theory on that is I used to not pull any energy from the ground. I was only getting it from the sky. And so then when the sun was less strong, I would really suffer. But
oh,
that's basically resolved. And then also, you mentioned my singing. My voice has become so much more free as my little hedgehog feet are learning how to go on the ground.
yeah. Yeah, I have some theories about that too, because it's such a big topic in almost every lesson is just like what's happening in the lower body. And many somatic forms are just like, feel your feet. That's like the first intervention. And, the sacral nerves and the pelvic floor are actually part of your those are parasympathetic nerves, the nerves that open up for pee and poo and all that stuff. And so if your feet, because that's the other end of those sacral nerves, are like this, then there's a part of your system that can't quite just calm itself, I think.
Makes so much
That's
sense.
that's my theory.
Yeah, I mean, one of the other like funny side, well, I mean, I don't know, it wasn't funny, but it was so unexpected to me. Side effects at the beginning of my training was that I
Mm,
just started to feel this like feeling in the quality of my sleep that was just different. And I
mm,
never would have ever said that I had had a hard time sleeping. I have always been someone who's pretty
mm,
blessed. Like I fall asleep at night, I sleep through the night, I'm pretty good, you know?
mm-hmm,
But like after, I don't know, 3 or 4 months of training, there was
mm-hmm,
just this way that my body started to feel like it was like heavy in my bed in a good way that I had
mm,
never felt before in my life. And I'm sure it has something to do with that, right? Like, especially if you're born with cerebral palsy, right? It's like your feet are kind of sitting out like this from the very beginning. So
mm-hmm,
the
mm-hmm.
process is not even, sometimes they talk about Alexander technique as like returning to the way that your body functioned before you acquired habits that compromised you, right? But
Yeah,
I think in the case of people who have disabilities, it's like the possibility is even to go back farther than that a little bit and like find things that maybe have never been available to you,
yeah.
but it is what the body would really like if there were a way for the door to open to a new experience.
Yes. And this, Hailey, this is such a tender topic because I've done a little bit of work with like teenagers that have cerebral palsy that were also able to walk. They
Mhm,
had a lot, the person I learned the most from had a lot of spasticity.
mhm,
And so when he would lay down on the table, he would try to relax.
mhm,
And I, at the time, was unaware of how much anxiety he might have had about being touched
mm,
because I didn't know what kids with cerebral palsy go through with being stretched and stuff. But I learned from all the people the kind of violent, painful stretching that they were going through. But because I didn't do that, and the way I put my hands on, this is like was a first lesson with him. And then I asked him, I said, because he was kind of arching up off the table, and he described to me that one side of his body felt like he had a brain there, and then he had a different brain for the other side
oh,
that he
interesting.
couldn't control. And I said, well, are you
Mm,
trying to control it right now? And he said, yeah, I'm trying to relax it. And I said, well, what if you just didn't try to relax it? And then immediately his body did that drop. And there was he realized that there was this weird, it wasn't that he couldn't control the spasticity, but he didn't know how to do that. Like he'd been trying to do it in a particular way. So he had neurological capabilities that no one had ever known how to explore with him in this loop of like, what's the connection between what you're thinking and what you're trying to do, which is theoretically the voluntary side of our system, and what is happening. Let's play with that. And it's not like it's tender because you're not, there's no promise. We don't know. We're not trying to fix. We're just trying to find out how much agency does this human have, and how can we, there's always a little bit more, always. That's my attitude as a teacher.
Mm-hmm.
So
Mm-hmm.
maybe you could just, before we talk about the newer explorations you're going to do, maybe you could just talk a little bit, any feedback you have about what I just said, which was a lot, but also like for people who don't know what is the neurological condition cerebral palsy, just your story of what it is, how it was treated, and then what happened in your body and in your control of your body, what was so different about somatic education versus medical treatment.
Yeah, absolutely. It's interesting. I'm going to save a little bit about the what cerebral palsy is for the section on the new adventures that are coming up,
Okay,
because
good.
basically I had always had one definition in my head, and then my definition has recently shifted a little bit. For
Mm,
now, I'll share the one that I grew up with, which is cerebral palsy is basically caused when there's some kind of a traumatic brain injury very, very early in life. And so this is something that can happen in utero or during birth or shortly after birth. And then basically that section of the brain is not able to send the correct messages to the muscles that it would be talking to, so they don't grow and develop quickly enough to go along with the rest of the body. This is what I was taught when I was
yeah,
little.
yeah,
And so I was taught then that, like, basically as my bones had been growing, the muscles in my leg had not gotten the message to keep up. So they had basically gotten stretched, 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 tight, 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 tight. And that then, that takes a toll on the way my leg would look. That takes a toll on the way my foot would look. You can see I'm doing with my hands. I'm like
the
pointing toward the
angles
middle of
and
my
the,
body.
yeah,
Yeah, exactly. So that's the picture that I grew up with. We're going to go back to how that's been revised. But just to say that then, to treat, if you have that picture in mind, right, then treating it, at least the way I experienced it, right, the
yeah,
treatments that I had as a kid included, I wore like plastic braces in my
mhm,
shoes that it's interesting, they say that they're to give kids a better support or to like help them pick up their toes so they're less likely to trip. I do understand that. I also feel that in my experience, wearing them was very painful. And
mm,
so, like, it really, as an adult, I've gotta wonder, like, how much of it is to benefit the kid and how much of it is to make their walking look more able. Again, like I was saying before.
mhm,
So
mm.
I wore those braces. I wore a brace on my left foot and leg in some cases, basically every day until I was 18. Um, I
That's a lot
also
of
had,
pain. Whoa.
yeah, I also had like Botox injections injected into
Hmm.
specific muscles in my legs to basically inhibit the spasticity, right? To stop the muscle spasms that might come. And then in
Hmm.
my case, after I got the Botox injections, I my legs were casted. So I wore like walking casts that held my leg muscles in a permanent stretch for like I think I would say 6 or 8 weeks after the Botox. I had, I think, 3 rounds of that in my childhood.
Mm.
Um, I also had a pretty invasive, what they now call like a single event surgery. That was when I was 8. In my surgery, my hip was like broken and turned out, and then reattached at a better angle. Sorry, I shouldn't do the air quotes. I'm sure it was a better angle. I am sure that it was a better angle.
Mm.
Um, I also had synthetic hamstring added to my own hamstring muscle. And then I had two of the tendons that are going down, like from my calf toward my toes, I had the tendons each cut in half and half of them reattached on a different spot on my foot so that my foot would not curve inward toward the midline of my body, but would hopefully point straight ahead.
Point. Well, these are the surgeries I've heard of, is the tendon changing. I
Yep.
hadn't heard of some of the other things
Yep.
about keeping the muscles on stretch
Yeah.
like
And then the
that.
last thing that I had was a double tarsal osteotomy. Anyway, blah, blah,
It's
blah.
enough. It's enough
Yeah.
information for people to get the idea of, like, it's a lot
Yeah.
of alteration of your being.
And I must say, like, after the surgery, right, my rehab was this physical therapy that I gotta say, it was painful, like being stretched. It was very painful. I also had electrical stimulation therapy to stimulate the muscles. If I'm being honest, that was also very painful. Um, it was just a long road of lots of different stuff that always
Yeah.
felt like it was hurting probably as much as it was helping. Anyway, sorry, I got a little lost in the sauce there. Um,
Yeah. It's okay. You can
so
take a moment if you need it to,
I'm
you
just,
know,
the rest of your question was about how Alexander technique is different than that. Is that right?
yeah. Yeah. And we've already said a lot, but when we first met, it was that delight in the slowness. And I think you had even chosen to slow your training down because the changes you were experiencing took a lot of integration time. And so you were exploring your agency around time and just talking about how you were invited into the dialogue and so a little bit more about
Yes.
how that played out for you and how that's different.
Yeah, I mean, I'll say that like so once I started teacher training, right? Now I'm in Alexander Technique about 15 hours a week, and that's a lot of exposure. And when I started that, it was probably I started in September of 2023, and it was probably in October that I started to notice pretty big changes. Like there was one day in October that I was in my lesson with Anne, my Alexander Technique teacher, and she had her hands at my ankle on my left foot. And I was, it's standard practice in Alexander Technique that when you're having the chair part of your lesson, you're sort of looking out toward the horizon so that you don't, mess up your head, neck, back balance by, looking down somewhere. Not mess it up, but you would, we're trying to keep it basically
Alter it
neutral.
in a,
Yeah,
yeah.
exactly. Keep it basically neutral.
It's a more upright balance, yeah,
Exactly, exactly.
for
So I was
certain
just looking.
explorations, yeah.
Right. I was just looking out to the horizon, but I felt my ankle just like it felt like it was melting into Anne's hands. And oh yeah, you were asking me about like how this is different from, for example, being told to just relax. And you were describing the story of the boy you had worked with when you said,
Yeah,
"What if
he
you
was
just didn't
trying to
control it?"
relax, yeah.
This was also a huge thing for me. Like this first day that my ankle just sort of melted into Anne's hands, it felt so foreign to me that I had no idea how to place what was even happening. And I just,
Mhm.
tried to be very calm and just like, okay, I'm sitting on a stool. It's okay. I can see the room in front of me. It's okay. The ceiling is above me. Like, I am okay. Anne is here. I am okay. And if this is getting too weird, I can tell her, like, hey, can you take your hands off for a second?
Yeah.
But I was able to stay with the process of change because I knew I could stop it if I needed to, right? But that let me stay with it and stay with it and stay with it. And before I went to stand up to go do the table portion of my lesson, Anne said, wait a second, look down at your foot. And when I looked at my foot, I burst into tears immediately because I could see that my foot was in a shape that for all my life had been deemed medically impossible for me. For all my life.
Mhm.
And it had been what everyone was after with all the Botox, all the braces, all the casts, all the pushing, pushing, pushing. They had been trying to push it into this shape, and it
Mm-hmm.
had never been able to maintain it. And
Mm-hmm.
it was through this like process of letting go, letting go, letting go, and listening that then when
Mm-hmm.
I looked down at my foot, it had what felt like almost magically assumed this shape,
Mm.
you know? And it's not like it stays like that all the time. I get up
Mm-mm.
and walk, and it's a constant process, a process of refinement, of being
Mm-hmm.
aware of what's happening inside my own system and directing myself
Mm.
toward a use that is gonna serve me more, that feels better, right? Um,
Mm-hmm.
but in that moment, it's like I could suddenly see some of what was possible,
Mm.
and it was so incredible to me. Um,
So your sponsor, I started this YouTube channel almost 10 years ago to get high quality embodiment, movement, and somatics education out to the public, especially folks who might not otherwise have access because our work is not covered by health insurance here in the United States. So if you like this content, please share, please like, please subscribe, and especially share with your communities if they need support. And if you'd like to go deeper into some of what I'm sharing here, you can book a free 15-minute consult or a private lesson online. I teach online and also in person in New York City. And you can find all that information at embodiedlearningsystems.com. Thank you so much for watching.
if you don't mind, I'd love to just share one more anecdote
Yeah,
from my
yeah.
lessons that I feel is really relevant to the story you were telling about the young man you had worked um, with the whole like relax thing.
Yeah.
So there came a point in my Alexander lessons that Anne would have her hands wherever she does and be talking to me. It's not like we do our lessons in silence, but
Yeah.
you know, like wherever her hands were, it felt like a relatively clear message, like, oh, feel the width in your shoulders, or feel the at your like above your sit bone, or whatever. But there came a point that whenever she would have her hands on my left leg, anywhere below my knee,
Mm.
I would not be able to hear anything from her hands. Like, it's like I couldn't hear what they were telling me. And all I could hear and see was like red flashing lights, like
Whoa.
intruder alert.
Wow.
Yeah.
Yeah, that's like I think I don't have any, like no experience of what it's like to have cerebral palsy other than working with people. But I remember very clearly moments like this in my lessons where
Mm,
something was changing and I just had to go, it's okay, just let this change keep happening. We don't have to know. And I sometimes I couldn't maintain it for very long. Sometimes I
yep.
would get
Yep.
really angry because the teacher would say, "Can you tolerate that for longer?" Because they were like wanting me to do it for longer. And I was like, you don't have a clue what you're asking me to do. Like, this is a lot. And I couldn't even tell
Yeah.
you what it was about. It was just emotional. Like, I'm really open right now, and that's all I can handle. Thank you very much.
Dude,
Yeah.
I feel that's so hard. And that's like, yeah, eventually I like emailed Anne and I was like, hey, I just wanted to let you know, like when your hands are below my knee, I can't hear them. Like, I don't know what they're saying. I just get this overwhelming feeling of like intruder, intruder. And like, I know that I trust you. I know that this is my choice and I'm doing it. So I
Yeah.
want to stay here with you. And I'm
And
also having this simultaneous reaction that's like, fly away, fly away. And like, what can I do with that?
yeah.
And I wound up asking her, like, I can't really hear like what your hands are saying to me, but could you tell me what you're thinking? Like, what are you thinking in those
Yep.
moments? And she wrote me back and said, she said something extremely helpful that I still think about all the time. She said, when my hands are on your leg, I'm not trying to do anything in particular. I'm trying to sense what is, just sense what is. and then sense if I can feel any path to the ground, any at all.
Mhm.
And that for me was so huge because, like, all my life, right, a lot of these cerebral palsy treatments I had had, they really focused on like what is the right kind of movement and what is the wrong kind of movement. You know, like
Mhm.
curling my toes was wrong, sitting in a W was wrong, walking with one part of my foot touching the floor more than another was wrong, you know? And so I sort of developed all these rules in my head about like, okay, my foot's allowed to do this, but it's not allowed to do that. I'm allowed to do this, but I'm not allowed to do that. And it was so deep and so like not conscious, right?
Mhm.
That I had no idea how many paths to the ground I had closed because I had considered them wrong.
Yeah.
And once she gave me that permission that like any path is okay. Like, just see what happens, you
Just getting
know?
through to the other end, right?
Yep,
Yeah.
exactly. And like
And
once I
having
had that
somebody
freedom,
else's nervous system connected to yours also searching, but
yes,
not
yes, yes,
forcing anything,
yes,
not trying to,
yes.
um, we use the word manipulate.
Mm-hmm,
And I think that that would be the idea behind trying to stretch a muscle, because there's a
mm-hmm,
hope that if you manually stretch a muscle, the message will get back to the brain,
mm-hmm,
but which is the circuit that's like been affected.
mm-hmm,
But what we're doing is we're using not force, but body schema, just sensory contact, and then the mystery of somebody else's entire nervous system just there, kind of curious, engaged with you, you know, a second person expert
absolutely.
on your experience, but not
Yep,
one that's trying to alter directly
yep, yep.
anything. Yeah.
It's so interesting. I mean, you had asked me when we were preparing for this interview if I maybe had like an exercise that I might want to share with listeners, and
Yeah.
particularly about cerebral palsy, perhaps, you know?
Yeah.
And I really thought about that. And it's so funny, but like my answer from my own experience is like, I don't think it would be possible for me to really understand what the exercises were getting at without hands-on.
Hands on. Mm-hmm.
Mhm. And that, like, for me, it's like, yeah, of course I used to be able to think, okay, feel your sit bones on the chair, you know? And of course I could think that all the livelong day. And I
Yeah.
did. I think that's a big part of why I liked Alexander technique actually, because there was a mental component. And so,
Yeah.
and I've always been, like a bright person. So it was like, okay, I can stand a chance here, right? But I would be thinking my sit bones on the chair, and it's like, through factors that are completely outside of my control, right? Like having tight hip flexors or something like that from cerebral palsy.
Yeah.
Like my sit bones were not really going through the chair, but I never could have arrived at what that throughness felt like in my own sit bones without hands on. I'm absolutely positive I never would have
Yeah.
known it
Yeah.
because it is so deeply, it had never been a part of my experience
Yeah.
ever.
Yeah.
And the fact that it is now coming into my experience, I mean, that's also the reason I'm really well pleased that my training is taking its sweet time because
Yeah.
man, I'm telling you, like I get these sometimes I get crazy side effects. I get like it's really really challenging. You talked about like waves of emotion. There have been some emotional just wallops that have come up through this
Yeah.
training, and it's all cool in the pool, It's all part of the process, and I'm here for it, but I'm very grateful to be able to pace it and to
Yeah.
know that like it doesn't all have to happen in a day. And in fact, it won't. It's not
Yeah.
possible.
No, that's right. It actually won't. It can't. It won't.
Yep.
And and so yeah. Our time is coming close, and
Hmm.
I think we're going to talk again Can you tell me a little bit about how so Hailey's going to be going to visit a, is he a physical therapist? What is
I would
he?
call him a
Clinician.
clinician or a practitioner.
And what country? Where is he?
So he is from Russia, currently based in Belgium, but he does workshops throughout Europe, and the one that we are going to is going to be in Spain.
In Spain. So
Hmm.
Anne Rodiger, who Hailey is training with at Balance Arts Center, and Hailey have discovered this person, Leonid Bloom, and they've arranged, you're going to tell me um, why this new piece coming in is of interest more to you, but I've talked to Anne a little bit about it, and then we're going to hopefully do another interview and follow up. But yeah, maybe just tell us a little bit about what's different and what's intriguing you about this new work as you follow your muse, your healing muse.
Of course, of course.
Yeah.
Um, yeah, so in a nutshell, basically, starting by about like February in my training, in my first year of training, there were certain moments that I would run into difficulty in training class, and I would be just really would not know what was happening. Like,
Mm,
I would go from sitting to standing and I would be like overwhelmed by like a panicky fear sensation or something, right? Or I would go from sitting to standing and it was obvious that something wasn't, I was wanting something to happen with my mind, but that it wasn't happening or something, right? But I couldn't see myself. And so I started to say to Anne, like, I don't know what's happening. Like, I need to know how to help myself, and I don't know what to do. And she was like, okay, 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 like, whoa, whoa, whoa. Um, and at some point, she basically said, hey, I think you should watch these videos from this researcher that I know about. And she had learned about Leonid's work before meeting me. She had
mm,
learned about his work because he works through the lens of biotensegrity, which also appeals very much to Anne. And so
mhm,
they had been connected through that mutual interest. And she had seen a couple of his videos that
mm,
happened to be about his method of helping people who have cerebral palsy. He's
mhm,
developed a method, it's called advanced biomechanical rehabilitation. And basically, Anne sent me a couple of his videos talking about body mechanics and body mechanics and the way they're affected by cerebral palsy and the way that he understands what's going on. And basically, when I watched his two videos, I was like dumbstruck because they were so amazing. I
mm,
had had all my life as a kid, I had had these questions, like, okay, you're saying I have tight calves, but when I do a stair stretch, I can stretch just as far as my mom. So I don't think it's just that my calves are tight. Like, I think it has a lot more to do with how my leg is functioning as a whole when I'm doing something, right? I would say that kind of thing. And I
mhm,
would usually get kind of brushed off. And it was like I just had all these questions and these observations about the way it seemed like my own body was working
mm,
more as a whole than as a collection of parts. And it
mm,
just always felt that my questions were kind of brushed off. And basically, when I watched Leonid's videos, I first was overcome with like joy, like exhilaration, because he was explaining cerebral palsy in a way that finally made sense to me. Like it was
mhm,
like all the questions I had had through my whole childhood were
mm,
answered in 2 hours.
mm,
Which is a ridiculous thing to say, but like it really felt like suddenly I was getting all these answers
mm,
and the way he was explaining things was resonating with me on a deep intuitive level
mhm.
that other explanations had failed to do, right? And so, yeah, basically it was like deep joy followed by like profound anger and sadness that like people had been looking at cerebral palsy through a different lens
Mhm.
for, all my childhood and basically still. Um,
Mhm.
and I'll just, again, sorry, it's a big topic, but in a nutshell, like the
Yeah.
way that Leonid describes cerebral palsy is that the injury, the first injury in the brain that happens when the person's very young in utero, shortly after birth, under a year old, whatever, that what it does is it impacts the breathing mechanism. And then when the lungs aren't breathing with their full dimensionality,
Mm,
the back does not fully develop. And when the back does not fully develop,
mm,
then the support structure, the main support structure of the person's body, which is the head, neck, and back,
yeah.
the main support structure has like built-in weakness, as it were. And so then the tension that comes from cerebral palsy, especially the spastic kind of cerebral palsy, which I have, is that the limbs get recruited by the head, neck, and back to try to stabilize the body, right? And
Right.
so, like in my case, my left leg would be tight because it's getting recruited to try and help my back, you know?
So the
Um,
spasticity was your system's attempt to support you.
right, exactly. The
Yeah.
spasticity is like from the muscles being overtaxed because they're being asked to do a job that they are not meant for,
Yeah.
basically.
Which is kind of like what uh, Alexander wrote like 100 years ago to
That
a certain
too, like
extent.
100%, like watching
Yeah.
Leonid's videos and also just like for example, right, in Alexander technique, we're all about the head, neck, and back, right?
Yeah.
Leonid, what he's all about is the sitting platform, which is like the sit bones and the pelvis, right? The
Yeah.
sitting platform, the back, and then the support of the head. Can the head be supported by the body? And those are his first like checkpoints,
Yeah. Yeah.
which to me is just so, all my life it was like your legs, your legs, your legs. No one ever, it seemed to me, stopped to ask how my legs were relating to my back, you
Yeah.
know? Yeah. So anyway, basically, because his paradigm matches up so well with what we are doing in Alexander technique, we wanted to go and visit him, mostly because, I mean, he has a huge expertise in working with people who have cerebral palsy. He's
Yeah.
worked with tons and tons of people in his rehabilitative therapy that he has coined. And again, in a nutshell, his therapy is like he uses vibrating tools and like layers of cloth, like towels, to really like widely dispense vibration onto parts of the body to stimulate growth of connective tissue. His
Ah,
thought is that the body wants to help itself, it wants to rewire itself. And in
yeah.
the case of cerebral palsy, there are barriers there that are actually in the brain so much as they were in the brain at one point at a crucial time of development. But
Right.
in a similar way to stroke patients, right, who have the possibility to regain brain function, the idea is that many people who have cerebral palsy, they do regain the brain function to have the dialogue between the muscles in the brain, but
Yeah.
there are already structural limitations within the body that place limitations on what's physically possible.
Right.
And with these vibrational tools, he's basically inviting certain parts of the body, either the connective tissue between the bones or even the skin in some cases, to like wake up and
Yeah.
further develop so that then the body can assume the next phase of self-support that
Yeah.
it craves, if that makes sense.
Yeah, it does. It makes so much sense. And um, I think people who are working with fascia and understanding now how fascia actually is a tissue that connects one kind of tissue with another, that
Hmm.
I'm hearing from other sources that this vibratory stimulation is being understood as very, very beneficial in different kinds of treatment. And yeah, so there's so many things we could talk about, Hailey, but I'm so glad that you were willing to tell, a pretty personal, powerful, vulnerable story. And I'm just wondering if there's, before we close,
Hmm. Hmm.
if anybody listening has cerebral palsy and has been pondering these questions, we'll put some links below, especially a connection to Leonid's work, And so you can reach out to Hailey. Would you be willing to talk to people that can reach you
I
through
would
your
love to
website?
talk to people. I would love to talk to people. And I also will share that so our trip to go visit Leonid is happening at the end of September, and
Yes.
then we will actually be hosting an online panel. I believe it's on October 11th. We will be hosting a free panel on Zoom where we're going to be sharing some of what we learned. So if
Okay.
anyone's listening and they're interested in coming to that, maybe we can link to that as well.
Yes. Okay, great. So I'll get those, all those links will be there for you. And is there anything else you'd like to say before we close for anyone who's considering training, for anyone who's interested in somatic education, and for anyone with cerebral palsy, anything that you would like them to know?
Yeah, I think like the number one thing that comes to my mind is like if you can in your life, just try to carve out a little bit of quiet time where you can tune in and listen into your own intuition and what it's telling you.
Mm-hmm.
Um, it was without a doubt my own deep intuition that led me to Alexander Technique and that led me to teacher training.
Mm-hmm.
Um, and this path has been, frankly, I feel I've experienced like more healing or more like, I don't know if you could say rehabilitation, but just I have experienced for the first time in my life, instead of just a decline because of cerebral palsy, for the first time I can see an upswing
Mm-hmm.
coming my way. And that is a huge gift. And, I'm sure that different people are different, right? And so it's not necessarily that Alexander Technique is a magical cure-all, though I
No.
do think it's very magical. And if you're considering training, I would say, welcome to the party, baby. Like, let's go. Hop right on in. Call me. Like, let's party. Um, but really taking that time to listen to your own intuition and to know that what your spirit, what your mind, what your deep self has to say about your body, that
Mhm.
matters just as much or more as what
Mhm.
everyone on the outside might be saying.
Okay, I'm going to try to take that advice too. Especially as anybody who watches the channel knows, I'm a innovator. I'm creating new practices, and we've had so much discussion about, is there scientific proof? And so much of this work is, I don't want to say ahead or behind science. We don't understand why it's working, but we know it's working. And that's why we're here on YouTube. So, Hailey, thank you so much. Peace and love to you. And I hope this was helpful. And we'll get back with you when you return from your trip. Ciao.
Awesome. Thank you so much for having me.